My name is Savannah Brooks. 3 days before Christmas, my mother-in-law looked me in the eyes, smiled in front of 24 guests, and said, "You've lived off this family long enough." Before I could answer, her hand struck my face. The sound was louder than the Christmas music. The room went completely still. A little girl stopped opening her presents. Someone slowly lowered a wine glass. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed louder than anyone's breathing. I didn't touch my cheek. I didn't cry. I simply looked at the woman who had spent 8 years pretending to accept me while quietly trying to erase me from her family. Then she pointed toward the front door. "Get out." Those 2 words carried more weight than the slap. I turned toward my husband. I waited. Just one sentence. One step. One sign that he was still my partner. Instead, he stared at the dining table as though the pattern in the tablecloth had suddenly become the most important thing in the world. That silence told me everything. Not a single person moved. Not one. 24 witnesses. 0 voices. Outside, snow covered the front yard like a clean white blanket. Inside, every ornament sparkled under warm lights. It looked like the perfect Christmas. It felt like the end of my life. I picked up my coat from the chair beside the fireplace. I folded the apron I had worn since 6 that morning. I placed it neatly beside the serving dishes I had spent nearly 12 hours preparing. Roasted turkey, sweet potato casserole, homemade dinner rolls, apple pie. Every recipe had been chosen because someone in that family once said it reminded them of home. Funny how people can enjoy the meal while forgetting the hands that made it. As I reached the front door, my mother-in-law spoke again. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced with a smile, "Christmas can finally begin." Laughter followed. Not from everyone, but enough. Enough to tell me exactly where I stood. I opened the door. Cold winter air rushed against my face. The door closed behind me. No one came after me. Not my husband. Not my sister-in-law. Not the cousins who hugged me every Thanksgiving. No one. I stood on the porch for a long moment, watching snowflakes disappear against my black coat. It was strange. The slap hurt. The betrayal hurt more. But neither compared to the feeling of finally seeing the truth. Sometimes families don't throw you out in a single night. Sometimes they remove you one small piece at a time until there's almost nothing left. That Christmas Eve simply happened to be the night they finished the job. Or so they believed. Because while everyone inside was celebrating my humiliation, not one of them remembered something very important. A promise. A document. And one conversation that had taken place almost 7 years earlier. A conversation no one else had heard. A conversation with the only person in that family who had ever truly seen me. My late father-in-law. At that moment, my phone vibrated inside my coat pocket. I almost ignored it. Almost. The message came from an unknown number. There were only 11 words. "Don't miss tomorrow's Christmas dinner. Bring the sealed envelope Richard trusted you with." I stopped breathing for a second. Richard Brooks. My father-in-law. He had passed away 6 years earlier after a long battle with pancreatic cancer. The envelope. I hadn't thought about it in months. Actually, that wasn't true. I thought about it every Christmas. Because every Christmas, I remembered his final request. No matter what happens, don't open it until they leave you with no other choice. At the time, I thought grief had confused him. No. Standing alone in the snow, I wondered if he had been preparing me for this exact night. I looked back through the dining room window. Everyone was laughing again. My mother-in-law raised her glass as if she had won something. My husband was still sitting in the same chair. He hadn't even looked toward the front door. Not once. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, started my car, and drove away. I had no idea that less than 24 hours later, that same dining room would become the place where every secret they had buried would come back to life. And the person they thought they had destroyed would quietly change every one of their lives. The drive home should have taken 22 minutes. That night, it took almost an hour. Not because of the snow, because every traffic light gave me another chance to ask myself the same question. When did I stop belonging? It wasn't Christmas Eve. It wasn't the slap. It wasn't even when my husband chose silence. The truth was much harder to accept. It had started years earlier, long before anyone noticed, long before I did. I met my husband, Ethan Brooks, when I was 28. He wasn't loud. He wasn't charming in the way movies pretend men should be. He was steady. He remembered little things. The way I always ordered hot chocolate instead of coffee. The way I read the last page of a novel before buying it. The way I called my grandmother every Sunday without fail. After growing up in a small Ohio town where promises mattered more than expensive gifts, Ethan felt familiar. Safe. My parents believed character was built the same way a good house was built, one careful decision at a time. My father worked as a carpenter for nearly 40 years. He used to tell me, a crooked foundation never looks dangerous on the first day. Back then, I thought he was talking about buildings. Years later, I realized he was talking about people. My mother passed away when I was 23. After that, my father became both parents. He taught me how to repair broken cabinets, how to balance a budget, how to recognize kindness that expected nothing in return. Most importantly, he taught me never to confuse silence with peace. Sometimes silence only means someone has stopped fighting because they're tired. I wish I had remembered that lesson sooner. The first time I met Ethan's family was during a 4th of July barbecue. His mother, Patricia Brooks, greeted me with a smile that looked perfect in photographs. She hugged me, complimented my dress, asked polite questions. Anyone watching would have thought she liked me. But then came the first tiny crack. While introducing everyone, she smiled and said, "This is Savannah, Ethan's friend." We had been engaged for 3 weeks. I looked at Ethan. He laughed awkwardly. Mom forgets things. She didn't forget. She simply preferred her version of reality. I let it go. One small word wasn't worth an argument. Or so I believed. Those small moments kept happening. Every birthday card arrived addressed only to Ethan. Every family vacation was planned before I was informed. Every holiday photo somehow placed me at the edge of the group. Sometimes I was asked to take the picture instead. Patricia never insulted me directly. She didn't need to. She mastered something much quieter, erasing people without raising her voice. If I cooked dinner, she praised the ingredients. If I decorated the house, she complimented the furniture. If I organized family events, she thanked someone else. It was so subtle that even I questioned myself. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was too sensitive. That's what Ethan always said. Mom doesn't mean anything by it. Funny how the people being hurt are usually asked to be more understanding than the people causing the hurt. One person noticed. Richard Brooks, my father-in-law. He rarely interrupted family conversations, but he noticed everything. He had spent 42 years building Brooks Industrial Supply from a 2-person warehouse into one of the largest construction suppliers in the county. He understood people the way experienced architects understand buildings. Tiny cracks always become expensive problems. One afternoon, while Patricia was criticizing the way I folded table linens, Richard quietly handed me another stack. He smiled. Looks perfect to me. It wasn't about towels. It was about reminding me that someone saw what was happening. That small kindness stayed with me. As the years passed, Richard and I became close. Not because we talked every day, because we listened. Sometimes I'd bring him homemade soup after his doctor's appointments. Sometimes we'd sit on the back porch watching birds while he explained how he built the business. He often said, companies don't fail because of bad years. They fail because good people stop paying attention. Again, I thought he was talking about business. Now I knew better. Then came the diagnosis. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors estimated 8 months. Richard lived 11. Those months changed everything. I drove him to appointments when Ethan was traveling for work. I organized medications. I stayed overnight at the hospital more times than I could count. Patricia visited too, usually after checking whether someone important might see her there. Richard noticed. He never complained, but he noticed. One rainy afternoon, about 6 weeks before he passed away, he asked me to help him organize old files in his home office. Boxes covered every corner. Property records, business contracts, insurance documents. The room smelled like cedar wood and old paper. When we finished, he opened the bottom drawer of his desk. He removed a large cream-colored envelope. Across the front, written in neat blue ink, were 5 words. For Savannah. Only if necessary. He placed it in my hands. His fingers lingered for a moment. If life stays fair, he said quietly, you'll never need this. I looked at the envelope. What is it? He smiled. The kind of truth people ignore until money reminds them to listen. Before I could ask another question, he gently shook his head. Promise me something. I promise. No. His voice became firm. Promise before I tell you. I nodded. I promise. No matter how angry you become, no matter how badly you're treated, don't open it until they leave you with absolutely no choice. I stared into his tired eyes. I give you my word. He squeezed my hand once, then smiled. I knew I chose the right person. At the time, I had no idea what he meant, and I certainly didn't know that less than 24 hours after Patricia threw me out of her Christmas dinner, that forgotten envelope would become the one thing capable of bringing an entire family to its knees. I barely slept that night. The sealed envelope sat on my kitchen table. I must have looked at it 100 times. The paper had turned slightly yellow with age, but Richard's handwriting was still clear. For Savannah. Only if necessary. I remembered my promise. I had kept it for 6 years. Now I wondered if this was the moment he had been preparing me for all along. At exactly 8:15 Christmas morning, my phone rang. It was Ethan. For a second, I hoped he was calling to apologize. Instead, his voice sounded tired. Mom wants everyone back for Christmas dinner tonight. I said nothing. She thinks things got out of hand. Does she? Another silence. Then he added, can you just come? Please don't make today any harder. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because somehow I was being asked to make Christmas easier for the people who had thrown me out. I'll be there, I answered calmly. Then I hung up. I never mentioned the envelope. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, I unlocked the small fireproof safe in my bedroom closet. Inside were my passport, my father's wedding ring, a few old photographs, and Richard's envelope. I picked it up carefully. The seal was still untouched. My hands trembled just enough for me to notice. I kept my promise, I whispered. Then I broke the seal. Inside were 4 items. The first was a handwritten letter. The second was a notarized legal document. The third was a small flash drive. The fourth was a folded sheet of paper with one sentence written across the top. Read these in order. Richard always loved instructions. I smiled despite everything. The letter came first. His handwriting looked weaker than I remembered. Dear Savannah, if you're reading this, something I hoped would never happen has finally happened. Patricia has crossed a line she believes cannot be undone. If I'm wrong, burn everything inside this envelope and forgive me for doubting her. If I'm right, then it's time for the truth. I stopped reading. My heartbeat had become strangely calm. He knew. Years before it happened. He knew. I continued. There are things about this family that almost no one knows. Ethan doesn't know. Patricia doesn't know. Even my attorney only knows part of the story. Everything you need is in this envelope. Don't use it for revenge. Use it only to stop a lie from becoming permanent. My eyes filled with tears. That sounded exactly like Richard. Never dramatic. Always precise. The second document carried the letterhead of a law firm in Columbus. It was dated March 18, 2019. The title immediately caught my attention. Conditional Family Trust Amendment. I read every page twice, then a third time. By the end, I understood why Richard had protected it. The amendment contained one condition no one had ever mentioned. If Patricia publicly humiliated, abandoned, or intentionally removed Richard's legally recognized daughter-in-law from the Brooks family through intimidation or fraud, she would immediately lose control of the family trust. Every responsibility as trustee would automatically transfer to an independent executor. Richard had named that executor himself. My hands froze on the last page. The name wasn't mine. It belonged to Margaret Ellis, Richard's older sister, a retired probate judge, someone Patricia hadn't spoken to in almost 15 years. I leaned back in my chair. Patricia thought she controlled everything. She didn't even control the money anymore. She just didn't know it yet. The flash drive contained video recordings. The earliest was almost 7 years old. Richard sat alone in his office speaking directly into the camera. His face looked thinner than I remembered. "If this recording is ever played," he began, "then I failed to keep my family together. I watched every minute." He explained why he had created the legal clause. He described years of manipulation, financial pressure, emotional control, and one sentence stayed with me. "I spent too many years protecting peace instead of protecting people." When the recording ended, I quietly closed my laptop. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't planning revenge. I simply knew the truth had finally found its moment. At 6:45 that evening, I parked across the street from Patricia's house. The same lights sparkled outside. The same wreath hung on the front door. From the sidewalk, everything looked exactly as it had the night before. Only I had changed. I carried a simple leather folder. Nothing more. No dramatic entrance. No lawyer beside me. No speech prepared. Richard had built buildings, not theaters. Truth didn't need special effects. It only needed time. When I walked inside, conversation stopped for less than 2 seconds. Then everyone pretended nothing had happened. Patricia approached wearing a bright red Christmas sweater. Her smile looked carefully practiced. "Well," she said loudly, "I'm glad you decided to come back." Not, "I'm sorry." Just, "I'm glad you came." I nodded politely. "Merry Christmas." She blinked. Perhaps she expected anger. Instead, I removed my coat and quietly took the empty chair near the end of the table, exactly where I had sat every Christmas before. Dinner began. People talked about football, vacation plans, real estate prices. Children opened presents between courses. I barely spoke. Instead, I counted. Richard had taught me something years ago. When emotions rise, count facts. So I counted. Patricia interrupted me 4 times. She praised Ethan 6 times. She thanked every person who helped prepare dinner, except me. Again. Then dessert arrived. Patricia stood and lifted her wine glass. "I'd like to make a Christmas toast." The room became quiet. She smiled toward the guests. "Our family has always survived because we know when to let certain people go." Several heads slowly turned toward me. She continued, "Sometimes removing one difficult person protects everyone else." She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. Everyone knew. I placed my fork gently on the dessert plate, folded my napkin once, then looked toward the hallway. A familiar voice had just entered the house. "I certainly hope I'm not too late." Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was Margaret Ellis, Richard's older sister, former probate judge, and the woman Patricia never expected to see again. Patricia's smile disappeared. For the first time in years, she looked genuinely afraid. The room changed the moment Margaret Ellis walked in. Not loudly, not dramatically, just completely. It was the kind of silence that happens when everyone realizes the person who entered has information they don't have. Patricia slowly placed her wine glass on the table. "Margaret?" Her voice was different. For the first time that evening, she didn't sound powerful. She sounded uncertain. Margaret removed her coat and handed it to the woman standing beside the door. Then she looked around the dining room. 24 people. The same people who had watched me leave the night before. The same people who had heard Patricia tell me I didn't belong. "I believe," Margaret said calmly, "that I arrived at exactly the right time." No one spoke. I stayed seated. That was important. Richard had taught me something years earlier. When a building inspector arrives, the person who built the structure doesn't argue with the measurements. They wait for the report. Facts speak louder than emotions. Patricia forced a smile. "I don't know why you're here, but this is a private family dinner." Margaret looked at her. "No, Patricia." She placed a leather folder on the table. "This is a family matter involving a legal agreement." The color slowly disappeared from Patricia's face. Ethan looked confused. "What agreement?" Margaret didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at me. "Savannah, do you still have the envelope Richard gave you?" I reached beside my chair, placed the folder on the table. The sound was quiet, but everyone heard it. Patricia stared at it. "What is that?" I looked at her. "The reason Richard never wanted me to open it unless I had no other choice." She laughed nervously. "You're making this dramatic." "No," I said softly. I'm finally making it clear. Margaret opened the folder. The document inside was created on March 18, 2019. She looked around the room. Richard Brooks amended the family trust after discovering serious concerns about financial decisions being made without his approval. Ethan frowned. Financial decisions? Margaret nodded. Between 2017 and 2019, approximately $186,400 was transferred from company accounts into personal accounts. A few people gasped. Patricia immediately stood. That's ridiculous. Margaret didn't react. Those transfers were labeled as consulting expenses. Patricia crossed her arms. Because I helped my husband. No. Margaret opened another page. Because you wanted people to believe you helped your husband. The room became colder. Even though the fireplace was burning, Patricia looked at Ethan. Your father trusted me. Margaret replied. Your husband trusted everyone until he realized trust without accountability can destroy a family. Ethan looked at me. His face had changed. Not anger. Not yet. Confusion. Pain. Like someone discovering the house they lived in had hidden rooms they never knew existed. Mom, he whispered. Is this true? Patricia looked away. That 1 second answered more than words could. Then came the part no one expected. Margaret placed another document on the table. This is the activation clause. She tapped the paper. Richard included a condition. She looked directly at Patricia. If you attempted to remove Savannah from the family through intimidation, false accusations, or public humiliation, control of the trust would immediately transfer. Patricia stared. To who? Margaret smiled slightly. To me. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Patricia laughed. A small laugh. The kind people use when they are trying to convince themselves they are still in control. This is insane. She looked at me. You planned this. I shook my head. No. You waited for this. No. Then why bring that document here? I looked at the table, at the empty chair where Richard used to sit, because I spent 6 years hoping I would never need it. Patricia changed tactics. First came anger. You ungrateful girl. After everything we did for you? Then manipulation. She turned toward Ethan. Your wife is destroying this family. Then tears. Real or fake? I couldn't tell anymore. I was stressed. I made one mistake. Margaret remained silent because she knew what I knew. One mistake doesn't explain years of choices. One mistake doesn't explain hidden accounts. One mistake doesn't explain removing someone from a home on Christmas Eve. Then Ethan finally spoke. His voice was quiet. Did you know about this? I looked at him. About the document? He nodded. I knew it existed. When? Yesterday. His eyes lowered. After you left. That hurt. Because I realized he had only looked for the truth after losing me. Not while protecting me. Not while watching me disappear. After. I reached into the folder one final time. There was one more item. A handwritten letter from Richard. I placed it in Ethan's hands. He wanted you to read this if this day ever came. Ethan opened it. The room waited. After several seconds, his expression changed. His eyes filled with tears. What does it say? Patricia demanded. Ethan looked at his mother, then at me, then back at the letter. My father wrote that he hoped I would become a man who protected people, not just a man who protected his comfort. Nobody spoke, because everyone understood. The truth wasn't only about money. It was about choices. 3 months later, the investigation was complete. The company recovered $186,400 from unauthorized transfers. The trust was placed under Margaret's supervision for 18 months. Patricia lost control of the family finances. But the biggest change wasn't money. It was silence. The kind of silence that comes after a family finally stops pretending. Ethan and I didn't magically fix everything. Real damage doesn't disappear because someone says sorry. We went to counseling. We rebuilt slowly, one conversation at a time, like repairing an old house. You don't paint over cracks. You remove the damaged pieces first. A year later, I found something in my mailbox. A small package. Inside was my old Christmas apron, the one I had left behind the night Patricia threw me out. There was a note. Not from Patricia. From Ethan. It said, "I found this in the closet. I realized you left behind something you made with love. I hope someday our home feels like the place where you belong again." I held that apron for a long time, because sometimes the smallest objects carry the biggest memories. I used to believe justice meant watching someone lose what they took from you. I was wrong. Justice is simply the moment when the truth finally has a seat at the table. And that Christmas taught me something I will never forget. A person can build a family with love, but only the truth can reveal who was truly protecting it. This was not revenge. It was accountability. If this story reminded you to know your worth, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, drop a comment, and I will see you in the next one.